All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to it, Everything College Football Podcast. We're going to be diving into a bit of the off season here in early December. Still a lot to go down in college football, but for the Florida Gators, their season is essentially over. They're looking toward the future, and it's a brand new look for this team with all the hires they've made. John Sumrall the other day was hired as head coach, and he's instantly got to work with some fascinating hires in making his staff one of the top ones, not just in the SEC, but I think in the country with what he's been able to do these past couple of days, starting with the hire today, Buster Faulkner, to the offensive coordinator position. Nick, when I saw this, I was like, this is absolutely amazing. If I'm a Gator fan, I love this one because the last couple of years, if you've watched Georgia Tech, you've watched this guy manufacture just an incredible offense regardless of the opponent. I've seen them play Georgia, Miami, some top tier ranked teams, Clemson. They've given them all headaches with the scheme he brings to the table. A QB run centric offense for the Yellow Jackets. The ball is in the hands of the quarterback on pretty much every single play. They have a lot of jet sweeps, QB counters, QB power, zone runs. The skilled players all get a nice split of usage. He's just been an elite play caller, Nick, and that's why Georgia Tech has been such a tough out. I know this past year it was a little bit more predictable at times. They didn't have as much effectiveness throughout the season, but this was still a very good offense nonetheless. And the biggest reason why is just they keep opponents off balance. They drain clock. They do all the play calls I just alluded to. They're built around limited negative plays. They protect the football. Only 10 giveaways last year, 13 this season. So they do everything very well. And I think that as you're going to move into this SEC role, Faulkner definitely has some challenges when it comes to modernizing the offense, maybe a little bit more in terms of how much they open things up when it comes to that downfield passing attack. We got things to figure out in terms of personnel as well. But this is one of the younger, brighter minds I thought was a very underrated coach in college football. Nick, only 44 years old, was on the Georgia Bulldogs staff from 20 to 2022 as a quarterback coach. So this guy is going to continue to rise up through the ranks. And I think just from a pure play calling standpoint, this is what the Gators have been looking for. Billy Napier didn't do a great job calling that offense. Rob Sales, the offensive coordinator, also didn't do very well. I think that was the biggest knock on Florida, right? Is this staff was largely put together of a lot of people that people weren't aware of. Like me and you, we weren't really sure who these names were when they were brought in. And I think you ended up seeing the results kind of proved that they're still going to remain nameless. I think Faulkner coming in, Nick, this is going to be great. Summerall has his guy for offense, and this is a significant sigh of relief if you're a Gator fan.
Yeah, I think clear that Florida means business when it comes to putting together a staff. I think Summerall and company are quietly putting together the best staff of the offseason, and Florida may be the team that has the best offseason when this is all said and done. I think Summerall is the best G5 coach, maybe besides Golish. Potentially, you could say Golish is the best G5 coach, but I think him and Summerall are 1 and 2 for the best G5 coaches here. They brought in Faulkner, who I think is a phenomenal offensive coordinator, and then we'll talk about the defensive coordinator and the GM they brought in as well in a second to kind of wrap that all up. This is a guy that's got good experience despite being 44 years old. He's been coaching for about 20 years. So started coaching as a GA, when he was 25 years old, 24, 25 years old at Valdosta State, where he was a pretty solid quarterback for that team, and then ended up being a GA at Georgia as well. He bounced around, spent some time at some couple different programs. He was the OC at Arkansas State for a few years, and they had some decent offenses under him. Southern Miss as well had a decent offense under him in 2019. Spent those 2 years at Georgia, like you alluded to, where he was the quarterback's coach, quality control coach on some pretty solid teams that were really good for Georgia. They were able to win 2 national championships when he was on the staff there at Georgia. So clearly a really productive opportunity there. He went to Georgia Tech and he has been really good, right? This Georgia Tech offense has been really solid and consistent under him. He's been able to kind of develop this rushing passing attack that has really good balance here, where they're able to kind of throw you off your game. It's really tough to defend against and hard to play against the scheme. If he transitions the scheme, I think it could really work well for Florida, where it certainly might be tougher in a more physical conference, and it certainly is interesting to see if that scheme translates well to the SEC, where the quality of play defensively and the physicality is a little bit higher than the ACC. I certainly would be wondering what that looks like, but I think this is a potential home run hire here in terms of offensive guy. You're getting a young play caller who's really solid. Curious to see what type of work he can do with the offensive scheme, how he can build around that. But Georgia Tech's offense has been really solid. They've been able to produce in key situations here. They've been able to control the possession, control the clock, and put points on the board, which I think is very key for an offense like that. This is a really good hire here. A guy that knows your rivals program as well. I think it's always good to bring in, get that little bit of a rivalry advantage here. Clearly a big rivalry between Florida and Georgia that goes down every year in Jacksonville. I like this hire a lot. I think this is clear intention from Florida that they mean business. They want to contend for national titles. They want to contend for SC titles immediately here. And bringing Sumrall in, I like what he's done here, bringing in Faulkner. I think this could be a really strong hire. This could go a long way, and I like the fit.
And now you do want to talk about some of the potential negatives, right? Because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's going to be plenty of adversity to fight. And I think it starts with, Haynes King at Georgia Tech was a perfect fit for that offense. The pass game, a lot of that production came from play action, quick game tempo. He protected the football very well with good decision making. He's a very efficient quarterback. His best passing games, though, came against Boston College, Syracuse, and then they were playing from behind badly against NC State. That's the only time they were able to put up 300 plus passing yards. That's not no knock on King at all. It's just that was kind of the offensive style they opted to go with. And sometimes when he would not have as much efficiency, that could be a problem for him. There's a lot of close games this year for Georgia Tech against much weaker opponents. It ultimately caused them to stall out, mainly their defense, but their offensive efficiency was just not where it was in 2024 at times. Jamal Haynes at running back was supposed to be one of the top guys in the nation. He did nothing. He was at a horrible season. He could barely find 50 yards per game. At times, you would see Eric Rivers, Malik Rutherford, two very talented receivers, not have the greatest production. I felt like they definitely could have got them more involved. And, talent's not going to be an issue at Florida. I don't think they're going to lose too many guys in the portal. I think guys like Vernell Brown are going to stay put, Aiden Mizell, TJ Abrams. This is a group that is incredibly deep. They also have Eugene Wilson. I think he might look to stay around. So they're going to be very deep at wide receiver. I think the biggest question mark is what they can do at quarterback, right, Nick? Because DJ Lagway, he's not going to be a fit for this scheme. Occasionally he would, do QB draws. He would kind of catch the defense off their heels. He's a 250-pound guy. You don't expect him to run. And occasionally that would work, but really not. He had a bad season as a quarterback. The development was not there. It's going to be up to Faulkner and the staff to develop him as a quarterback, and I think that's the biggest question mark. Can that be done with this five-star, ex-five-star prospect that is? He had 14 interceptions this past year. It was not pretty. Never seemed to improve, Nick. And we talked about this after 2024. Everyone was talking about Lagway as a top 10 quarterback. And when we looked at the film, we were like, he's a great deep ball thrower. Everywhere else, though, he's really below average, and he's going to have to improve in those areas, and he did not. So this is a massive project here. Lagway's going to be a junior, so you only got 2 more years of him. So, trying to figure out quarterback position's interesting. I want to get your thoughts on that. Then I'm going to throw out a name in the transfer portal that I think might be a perfect fit for the Gators.
Yeah, I think it's certainly the one person that's probably disappointed with this news was DJ Lagway because you're not entirely sure exactly what the fit looks like for him. I agree, it's not really a good fit, and there is a ton of high upside potential with Lagway. I still believe in him. I still believe that the potential is there for him to be a star quarterback in the SEC, but he obviously has a lot of polish that needs to be figured out, and it was very obvious from the film in the offseason that we were, putting maybe the cart before the horse here, had to pump the brakes just a little bit. The turnover problem was clearly a big issue for him this year, and he just doesn't have really the frame to kind of fit in that sort of system that you want to run that they ran at Georgia Tech. It would be very curious. I'm very interested to see what that looks like in the offseason. I'm presuming Lagway will be the starter, but maybe that is a false presumption here. Maybe he could find himself heading out the portal. I don't really know. We'll see exactly what happens here. DJ Lagway is probably not loving this hire. I think Faulkner, if he wants to try and build around Lagway, I think there still is so much talent there, and I think I agree with your point that the Florida Gators will be able to keep a lot of their wide receivers from this current team right now, and I believe they'll probably be able to keep Jaden Ball as well, who would be a key piece to have for this offense. I think that Faulkner could really make Ball a phenomenal back, better than he already is, which he is already one of the better backs in the conference in my opinion. So it'll be very solid if he can return right now. So I look at that, and I think that's certainly something, an interesting aspect to keep an eye on here. I am curious to see what you think about in terms of quarterbacks out of the portal potentially, because at this day and age, Florida could certainly go out and get a quarterback, potentially get somebody just to compete with Lagway and see who comes out on top for the starting job in Gainesville.
Yeah, I think when you talk about potential portal options, you look at a guy that just entered in Colton Joseph from Old Dominion. This guy seems to be a perfect scheme fit for what he was able to accomplish for the Monarchs. This is a guy that had over 1,000 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns, another 2,600 yards and 21 scores through the air. This is a guy that significantly improved his play from year 1 to year 2, but in both seasons he showcased that dual threat capability. And even though he does have 15 interceptions over 2 years, you're trying to make a lot happen when you're playing for that school, right? In that conference, it's not always going to be easy. You're also playing with a lot lesser talent. But this is a team that just ripped off 5 wins in a row, mainly off the heels of his playmaking. And, he seems to check most of the attributes when you watch him on tape for what could be for this offense. And I think that mainly, that 1,000 rushing yards piece is something that's very enticing when it comes to him. It's a guy that could be a dual threat player and certainly improve his efficiency. And I think he'd be great when it comes to fitting right into here when it comes to the QB run aspect. Now, I definitely don't know Faulkner. It's going to be a sit and wait situation to see if he tries to, you know, kind of, what is it? It would be like a carbon copy of the offense from Georgia Tech, because I don't know if that will exactly work like you alluded to in the SEC. But if they want to slowly transition from what he runs now into something a little bit more modern when it comes to attacking downfield in the pass game, I think this would be the great way to go. Just to bring stability to this offense, because I graded Florida before the season as an A. I thought they'd be one of the best offenses in the country, and they ended up being awful, of course. So I think Colton Joseph, Nick, would be a great fit. Um, Again, I'm not sure what they're going to do with the offense long term. I don't know if the scheme will exactly stick, but I think Faulkner's going to do a great job, and if he has to adapt, he will. But I think Joseph's a perfect fit from day one.
I think Joseph could be a very interesting pick considering that he just entered the portal. He had a really solid year at Old Dominion. He was a good leader for that team. A team that ended up went 9-3, by the way. They just missed out on the conference title game in the Sun Belt. Joseph, I think, he is certainly a quarterback that's physical, right? Even though he's 6'2", 200 pounds, he's still physical. He's a guy that likes to absorb contact and really solid, really good after contact as well. Really solid in that regard, and he is somebody that could certainly be a target into the portal for a reason. You saw a little bit of a drop in terms of his passing efficiency this season in terms of pure yardage around the same comp rate. They had a bit less attempts as well, but you saw that rushing efficiency increase 1,000 yards on the ground for him this season, and certainly a strong number at that 6.4 yards per carry. I would certainly keep an eye on that. I still believe in Lagway, so I think DJ Lagway could certainly be the quarterback for this Florida Gators team. They may adjust the system a little bit to kind of fit Lagway better. He is a prospect that's a raw prospect, but I think he's a prospect you can develop and get a whole lot out of.
I think his skills and savviness would make a lot of sense, and I think that's a very underrated addition that could potentially come true for the Gators. Looking at the other coordinator hire that was made a few days ago, Brad White coming over from Kentucky. I love this one as well. I was told about this one. I instantly jumped at the idea, and I thought it was a good one. Him and Sumrall, of course, worked on the Kentucky staff together many years back. He ended up evolving into a defensive coordinator. He's been in that role since 2019 until Mark Stoops was just fired. And I know sometimes the Kentucky defenses were a little bit more stagnant than you would have liked to see. It's always an uphill battle. Especially for the Wildcats, having that offense they did the last couple of seasons where they are always turning over the ball, they're always punting, so that certainly skews the numbers a little bit. This is a team that always looked strong in the front seven. This 3-4 under Brad White was tremendous. He's a great linebacker coach. I think that's really what his skill set is going to be tailored around most, is trying to develop these linebackers, not just in the middle, but as pass rushers as well. That's his cup of tea, being an outside linebacking coach. It's going to take some years, obviously, to transition into that scheme and get the players in that are going to fit the skill set of playing that position. But I love this ad of Brad White. I think him and Sumrall having that camaraderie is going to make things much more free flowing. Not going to be many disagreements, right? We're going to sit here, we're going to be in the think tank together, working towards a common goal. And obviously at Florida, that did not always seem to be in session. So I think this is great from a personality standpoint. These guys are going to get along greatly. They have immense trust together as well. This defense is absolutely going to see some improvement. And for the Gators, Nick, that defense was actually pretty good for most of the year. They played a top 5 team almost every single week, and they kept them in a lot of those contests. So a lot of the raw talent is already there. I think they're going to continue to build off the resources they have, and this will be another group where you can expect a lot of improvement.
Yeah, I think this is a really good hire. I think Brad White is a strong defensive coordinator. It's got a really good track record. He has some NFL experience as well. He spent about five seasons with the Colts as an outside linebacker coach. For 2 of those, he was an outside linebacker coach at Kentucky, obviously. Josh Hines-Allen is a pretty notable prospect that played under him at Kentucky. Hines-Allen played his senior year under him at Kentucky, and obviously he's ended up being a phenomenal player in the NFL for the Jacksonville Jaguars, a really good prospect that came out of Kentucky. He was really good at Kentucky. I think this was a good defense that, at times it certainly had some issues, but in general they were really solid and they were productive at points. They were, they looked okay at times this year, right? 26.4 points per game overall, but they had some success against the run. Certainly 3.66 yards per attempt is not a bad number at all. The secondary had some decent pieces as well. He was able to coach some solid pieces that ended up getting drafted. Kentucky has put some solid guys in the NFL, some first-round draft picks here and there in the secondary as well. So Brad White's been able to put together a solid resume in terms of defensive coordinator at Kentucky, and I think anytime you're able to take a defensive coordinator from within your conference and pull pull them to your side. That's always a good thing to see. It's certainly an upgrade, and it could really work out well for your program. I think he's a younger guy that's certainly got good experience in this, conference, got good experience coaching physical, hard-hitting defenses here. Florida's defense has to be able to bring in talent that can really produce on the field. They got to be strong on the interior. They got to be strong on the edge. They certainly have to be strong at linebacker. And I think you're bringing in a guy that can do so. There's a lot of good talent in the state of Florida in terms of linebacking and defensive talent, and you'll be able to bring that talent in with a good recruiter and a good coach that can really sell that vision, sell that position here. I think we'll see Florida's defense improve. I think Brad White could be a solid fit. I like what they can do with this move. I think, again, getting a guy in the conference is always really solid. This should be a really solid move. He's been able to get some good things out of lesser talent. Give him more talent at Florida. He should be able to produce a pretty solid defense.
Yeah, I think those are significant upgrades compared to what Billy Napier had on staff, and you also want to put the general manager in that area as well. Jacob LaFrance was the general manager under Napier. He worked with him at UTSA, and then Louisiana Lafayette is mainly where he got a lot of experience. They just weren't cutting it right. I think they did a pretty good job on the recruiting trail, but ultimately they were not able to put it all together. And I think Dave Caldwell is going to come in and especially try to maximize what they can do in the portal, because Florida didn't really do a whole lot in the portal. And I didn't feel like they needed to last year. But in today's day and age, it doesn't hurt to go out and get a couple of elite players. And I think Florida was certainly capable of doing so. Dave Caldwell, former general manager of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, as a Jags fan, Nick, this guy was never great. He did help assemble a roster back in 2017 that competed for a potential Super Bowl opportunity. But in terms of long-term stability, he really didn't cut the mark. Had a lot of misses in the draft. And I think that NFL general managing is going to be significantly different than college general managing, right? Because in the NFL, you're making the final decision on every player. In college, it's more of a team effort to go find those players that we want to get. And I think when it comes to recruiting compared to finding hits in the NFL, it's going to be a lot tougher, right? Because you can always find a nice role for somebody in college, even if they run a 4-3 and that's all they can do. They're going to find a role in college football. So I think it's definitely going to be easier in that sense. But, when it comes to program strategy, making sure that NIL in recruiting, managing the roster is all structured properly. That's why the college general manager role is important, right? It's not even close to the NFL. It's significantly different. And I think he's also learned a lot under Howie Roseman the past couple of years working for the Eagles. I think this hire for Florida makes a lot of sense because it's a guy that does have some respectable experience, and it's a guy that's definitely going to work hard when it comes to trying to maximize all these opportunities for Florida. And you've seen these guys come from all different ages and walks of life being general manager, Nick. You really just need to find a guy who's going to be invested, and I think he's looking for another opportunity to really improve his football career in terms of management at only 50 years old. So he's going to put a lot of effort into this, and I think it's going to work out well.
I think it's totally worth the gamble if you're Florida. Obviously, the new NIL era. This is the idea of having a general manager at college was sort of a foreign idea just 2 years ago, but now it's something that the bigger programs are starting to do. You're starting to put this piece in place. Stanford has theirs, UNC has theirs, and they're bringing in guys here that can run the programs, and it's very good to have for your program. This is a guy that's got good NFL experience. He had some, decent draft picks. I mentioned Josh Hines Allen. He was drafted by Caldwell for the Jaguars, and what I thought was a really good pick at the time, and has turned out to be a continually good pick for them. He had some decent picks here and there. Yeah, he had some whiffs too, obviously, but that team had some bright spots under him while he was in Jacksonville. You would obviously know better than me as a Jaguars fan, so I don't need to certainly talk about that. You could attest to that. But he's a guy that's won 2 Super Bowls. Part of his resume as an executive, he was a scout for the Colts when they in the early 2000s when they won the Super Bowl with Peyton Manning, and then he was on the staff at the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl this past season. So this is a guy that's got good experience for a couple different teams, has some experience with the Falcons, the Panthers, as well, in addition to the Jaguars and the Colts. So good NFL experience all around here. And like you say, it's definitely an interesting role being the GM in college, but it's a very key role with the way things work here. I thought Florida's portal work was lackluster in the Billy Napier era, and I think they really need to embrace the portal here. I think at this point in time, you're a marquee program. You can get marquee players out of the portal. I believe they should be going after portal prospects and bringing in guys that can be big difference makers for their roster. I think a guy like Caldwell could certainly stand there and kind of put that roster together, build a team through the portal and through the high school recruiting. There's so much talent in Florida. You should still be able to bring in a great high school class while also bringing in a solid portal class. I think it's going to be the best of both worlds for Florida if they want to have success in this day and age. I think they can certainly do so with the staff they're building.
Yeah, I think just having a long-term experience in roster construction and being a talent evaluator is what it really comes down to. You look at some of the general managers in college football, incredibly young, right? So I think definitely having that vision as an older guy could definitely pay off for him. So I think this has been a great couple days for the Florida Gators, Nick. A lot of excitement I know that John Sumrall at first was not that home run hire that people were looking for, but guess what? You don't always need that, right? You can go to the group of five and get a good coach who's going to come in and establish a better culture, a better staff, and overall better football collectively.
Yeah, I think there was a really good hire across the board. I think they've done a great job. Lane Kiffin would have been a lot of fun at Florida, but that has potential to crash and burn knowing how he is. There's certainly a high risk, high reward of Lane Kiffin. Summerall is the more steady hand. I think he's a guy that can certainly build you a program. You saw it with him at Tulane and Troy. He was able to do a whole lot, bringing in experienced guys, high-level coordinators from the SEC and the ACC while bringing in a former 7-year general manager in the NFL. I think that's a pretty solid staff to put together here. You may see a very quick turnaround for the Florida Gators.
So for today's episode, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.